Welcome to the launch of the 4th edition of this Biochar Europe Market Report. We're getting kind of accustomed to it, always around this time of the year. And I'm very thankful for our chairman and key author, Hans-Jörg, to make time to do this launch here with us. This market report is special again. I think I would say every market report was special in some way because there's always some changes. This year, I would say we pay respect to the changing of biochar and pyrolysis, because in this version we pay respect to the transitioning biochar markets, also taking into consideration the responsible charcoal and metallurgy markets and the shift between those market segments of biochar. This is something we also are focusing on in Biochar Europe in general. We've created a working group. We're working a lot on metallurgical applications, which is a super interesting part of our business, and you can find information on that on our website. So we also take a look at projects globally, particularly also in the global south, because this is where just the most biomass is growing rather abundantly, and where we should definitely dig in. So we are looking at projects with European roots that also act globally. You will see all of this. Now, without much further ado, I would like to pass on to our chairman and the lead author of this market report, Hans-Jörg Leichenmüller. Thanks a lot for being here. And please.
Well, thanks a lot, Harald. So let me just jump into the presentation. And yeah, warm welcome also from my side. Happy and proud to present the work of this year's market report. We'll start like in previous years with an outline, setting the scene, highlights of the sector, and I would also like to do a deep dive into other CDR options. And then the second part will then be the market report and the data you are probably waiting for. Now, once again, setting the scene, there is biomass, there is the technical equipment, there is energy being produced, there's biochar being produced, and these results of the production also they form the revenue of a commercial project. But also when we look at the climate impact, there is an emission reduction element and the carbon removal element. And biochar, in any case, pays into both sides. On the top side, on the emission reduction by production of renewable energy, and in case the biochar is being used in the metallurgic industry as a replacement for fossil coal that is needed for the production of metals. And in case the biochar is used in carbon preserving applications, it's being paid in as a negative emission as carbon removal. And I once again showed this slide because of this one here. The markets for biochar, they are in transition. And we have a kind of this triangle. If you have biochar, highly aromatized biocarbon biochar, this can be used either in usage of responsible charcoal for barbecue, in metallurgic industry and CO2. And for this year, I had to kind of extend the view of the biochar production to these two other usages of biochar. And we see that these markets have been clearly in transition because there's a trend to use less charcoal in barbecuing because of people using more gas. Then we see also on a regulatory side, there is strong pressure on traditional charcoal, that is charcoal being produced without energy usage typically in the global south. And this is from the environmental impact very heavy. And therefore, if there is pressure on this imported traditional charcoal, that kind of pushes again biochar into these applications. Then if the ETS price and the price for fossil coal goes up, that drags on biochar into the metallurgy corner. And last but not least, depending on the level of the carbon credit prices, volumes will move to the left lower corner. So we will see that exact movement in the coming years, and this is always what we have to keep in mind, that it's one and the same material that can be used for either of the applications. Now, coming into the highlights of the sector, it's once again the metallurgic industry that has become an important off-taker of biochar from the European biochar producers. And just to be very clear, if the company wants to produce steel and silicon, there's just no option other than using carbon. And it's either fossil carbon or it's biogenic carbon. So we see now a strong movement from metallurgic players entering this space. That was also very visible at the Biochar Summit in Brussels 2 weeks ago. And here's the example of Outokumpu, a leading manufacturer of stainless steel, which announced 2 major investments, one in Germany for a biochar production facility that will start production in 2026, and another investment in a palletizing facility that will already become operational during the course of this year in Finland. And because of the importance of the usage of biochar in the metallurgic industry, we published as Biochar Europe a position paper, a white paper that was authored by Philipp Hauser, and that was sponsored by Carbon Future, Carbuna, Outokumpu, and Synkraft. And you can download this paper. It's a very exciting paper that gives very interesting insights into the usage of biochar in the metallurgic industry. So let's take a look at the main markets for biochar, starting with metallurgy. This is high level, because in the market report, we mostly focus on the production capacities, not so much on the markets, but I still want to mention this. So technically, this works. There's proof of concept. Volumes are coming up, relevant volumes are coming up, but prices are still under pressure because the alternative is the usage of fossil coal. But with increasing ETS prices for fossil coal, this market has a potential to scale very fast. Then the traditional market, I would call it traditional market for biochar in the agriculture, there is technical proof of concept, there is benefits to it, there is substantial volume, but this market is not growing fast, clearly. Then the third market for biochar in concrete, same here, there is technical proof of concept. Volumes are, though, very small today, but once regulatory hurdles are cleared, this market can grow very fast. And the fourth main market for biochar, usage of biochar in urban soils, there was a technique that was mostly coming from the Nordic countries. There are already substantial volumes, specifically in the Nordics, and the market is growing, but it's not growing very fast. So these are the 4 markets where the biochar goes into. Now, another market trend, as I would call it, is the inertinite certification. So I'm happy to present that we're working together as Biochar Europe under the lead of Carbon Standards International, together with Fusinite, Ithaca Institute, and Carbon Future on adjusting or introducing the inertinite benchmark method into the global biochar ceasing standard and what needs to be done. So stay tuned. This project will launch the journey to inertinite-based carbon sinks. Now, another trend, what we see in Europe is that feedstocks are more and more diversifying. That is sewage sludge, that is also residues from agriculture and wood residues. So we're getting broader feedstocks. Now, I want to comment on technology readiness levels, because we've been publishing that biochar production is at TRL 9 and 8. And that is true. That is true for some technology providers, but it's also true that there are many technology providers that have less experience, that are coming in, and that the important thing is that should somebody select a technology that is at TRL 6 or TRL 7 for a commercial project, this really needs a pioneer mindset and setup, because this equipment, such a customer will likely have to deal with teething problems of that technology. But funny enough, I would say, when I talk to all the equipment, or not all, but to many of the projects, what I hear is that most of the technical problems are related to biomass handling, and these are things that are not easy to solve, but they are solvable. Another key trend, and last slide on this section of the trends and highlights, is that power generation for the projects in Europe is getting more and more important, either with gas engines or with ORC turbines. Now, I'd like to look at the CDR benchmark. On the right side, we have biochar as it is in Europe, with typical projects with between 500 tons annual production to 5,000 tons annual production of biochar, typically with European manufacturers. On the left side, the Global South, that is a category that is currently scaling faster, and the projects are typically larger. So we see projects between 5,000 or typically between 5,000 and 25,000 tons, typically with Asian equipment manufacturers. And those two markets couldn't be more different. We start with the biomass. On the left side, there is high availability of biomass at low or even no cost. On the right side in Europe, there is biomass competition, and thus biomass is coming with substantial cost. Then permitting in the Global South can be very fast and pragmatic, and I would say pragmatic is not a word that is often used when people talk about permitting of projects in Europe. There is, though, on the energy side, the situation that in the Global South, the usage of the produced energy is clearly underdeveloped. Only a few projects use the energy. And on the European side, there is basically no way to make a commercial project, a profitable project, without taking advantage of the energy that is being produced alongside with the biochar production. So, and on the left side, and all of this means that on the left side, projects can work without a market value for the physical biochar, while in Europe, there needs to be a sales revenue for the physical biochar. Now, coming to the price levels of the biochar carbon credit side. So when people look at carbon credits, and that is based on about 40 expert interviews that I've conducted totally in this space. We see also different price level, and I'm talking here unsubsidized sustainable pricing for the year 2030, 2035, which is between 100 and 150 euros per ton CO2 in the Global South, while sustainably financed projects, unsubsidized, would need between 150 and 250 euros per ton of CO2. Now, coming to the broader side of permanent carbon removal and looking on the CCS side, I'm looking here on projects in Europe, again, for the year 2030, 2035. And so we have two of them are biomass-based and direct air capture, directly taking the CO2 from the air. Then the biomass-based options are producing energy alongside with carbon removal, while DAX requires additional carbon removal. All options are equally permanent, well beyond 1,000 years. And on the price side, in Europe, again, the 150 to 250 as unsubsidized sustainable price for BCR in Europe, while BECCS is, according to these expert interviews, unsubsidized between 300 and 450 euros, and DAX obviously, at least for the year 2030-35, well above this 450. Now, one might say, okay, let's go to the cheapest, but that's clearly not the task. When we look at the profiles, we clearly see that BECCS and biochar has complementary profiles. So it makes a lot of sense to combine these options and others as well. But on the example here, I want to show the specifics of these two projects. BCR, typically 1 to 2 megawatt plants for municipal heat or transition or industrial. So we're talking about integration into small to large heating networks. And there can be thousands to 10,000 plants in Europe because there is the need for the heat. On the pricing, we have good view. It is the mentioned 150 to 250 euros. It is proven technology. We're clearly talking about, I would say, 100 plants that are well operating, and the project development cycles are very short. On the back side, plants are typically significantly larger, I would say from 10 to 300 megawatt thermal. There is a requirement for infrastructure, a port, a CO2 pipeline in order to transport the CO2. So what is required for the usage of heat, there needs to be a very large heating network. So there's also less large, I would say several hundred plants is the potential. On the pricing side, here again, 300 to 450 for 2030, 2045, 2035. And all of these the technology components are available and proven in other contexts. So, but the projects have also longer lead time. But these, and I want to make this very clear, that the profile is complementary and we need both. Now, the biochar production and heat transition is a perfect match, and it's complementary to BECCS. Now, what is really important is that we have this technology openness in the on the political framework. This is why more than 200 companies also have addressed this in a letter to the European Commission. And to be very clear, scaling of BCR in Europe depends on compliance market. If BCR would be excluded from compliance markets, I don't think that the sector could grow very significantly. Now, very short on Biochar Europe, as the closing of this introduction. Well, I'm happy to tell you that we have grown now to more than 120 members, and I would like to thank all of our members for being members and for staying with us. And I'd like to also invite those of you who are here in the webinar that are active in this space, come in and join Biochar Europe. We're doing quite important things to the sector, that is in policy advocacy, on industry standards, here in research and market intelligence, what we're just doing here with this market report, and in communication. So now let me come to the market report itself and the results. And first of all, I'd like to thank those who supported me in writing this report, being Matthias Gustafsson, Esko Salo, Errol Iron, Paul Priot, and Philipp Hauser. Thanks a lot for your support in collecting the data. And my second thank goes to the sponsors of this report, being A Healthier Earth, Carbon Future, Carbona, and Carbon Standards International. Coming to the scope of the European Biochar Market Report, we are looking at biochar/biocarbon, which is kind of the same thing, two different names used by different people. We're looking at installations that have been installed in 2024 and that will be commissioned in 2025. And then we are not looking at torrefied material, so we are only looking at highly aromatized plants. Then we look in three categories, from micro to small, small between 200 and 450. Then from the other side coming, there are three larger groups: large, very large, industrial. And then we have two mid-size classes, which we cluster the systems to. Now, coming to the manufacturing equipment, there are 30 equipment, more than 30 technology providers in Europe. Many of them are at TRL8 or even TRL9. And I've mentioned that already before, that obviously not all of the providers are at this TRL8 or TRL9 providers, but it is important to see the huge progress. And I won't name them individually. You will be able to download the report and look at them, but clearly we've seen even again a growing number of equipment manufacturers, also one or two left the business, but we're still in total growing on the equipment manufacturer side here in Europe. And should you be an equipment manufacturer or be aware of one that is not on the list, please contact me and send me what you have. Then we have project developers that are becoming more relevant in the case, that are companies that have or plan to install several installations. And I've clustered them for this report in two groups. These 5 companies have projects installed in Europe, while these 2 companies are European companies that have global projects. And there are many more. I just listed those 2 who are members of Biochar Europe. Now, coming to the data, and we saw in 2024 33 installations being installed and commissioned, and that was much less than the 54 projects that were on the radar screen a year ago. Many slipped to 2025, a few got cancelled, and for 2025 we have 46 projects under construction or under contract for 2025 commissioning. So in total, we are at 203 installations. Out of these 203 installations, 185 are currently in operation. So there are also plants that have been decommissioned. And by end of this year, we'll have around 250 installations. And there are many projects, and specifically larger projects, that will go that are in the permitting process for commissioning in 2026. Now, coming to the volumes, and here again on the right side, you can see this triangle. So what we look now is only the relevant portion that goes into carbon preserving applications, and we've seen a growth to in total 84,000 tons. But again, less than we thought a year ago. So from a year ago, the projects that were announced by the companies that we've spoken to was around 115, and we looked at what is the difference. And there was a bit of decommissioning. There was volume that was anticipated to go into the carbon preserving application, but then went into metallurgy. Then a bigger part is there was temporary shutdown in at least 3 or 4 cases for technical problems or for commercial reasons. And the biggest element here is project delays and a bit of cancellations. Now, looking to where are we going to with the announcements, with the projects that are under contract, under construction, or already commissioned, we can expect that the biochar carbon removal, or the volume that goes into biochar carbon removal, will grow to 114,000 tons. And so, you know, this probably from previous presentations in previous years, looking again at the growth rates, we clearly see that the growth rate has dramatically dropped this year to only 12%. So that's the growth here to 84,000. But taking the projects into account that are under construction, under contract, we can expect that the growth rate will grow again to something like 37%. In average growth rate, 34%, which is still a high growth rate. And then we've looked also into the projects that are in the pipeline for 2025 following, so meaning 25 to 27. And there's 40,000 tons of production capacity dedicated or planned to be dedicated to carbon preserving applications, 40,000 tons in construction under contract, and 80,000 additionally in advanced planning. Then from production capacity, there was production capacity to production. In order to assess this, the assumption is that in the year of the installation, we assume a 6-month operation and a 50% uptime, while in the following years we assume a 12 months operation and 70% uptime, and both percentages were reduced by 10% compared to last year's report because of the insight I got from the equipment operators. This estimation brings us to 55,000 tons of biochar production in 2024 and growing to around 70,000 tons of biochar dedicated to BCR in 2025. Then converted to CO2, this means that we're talking about 150,000 tons of CO2 in 2024 and close to 200,000 tons in 2025. So once again, BCR is today's most relevant industrial CDR technology for permanent carbon removal in Europe. Now, I want to show you again the triangle, because the growth we have clearly depends on the equilibrium in this triangle. So the 84,000 tons that I mentioned just, that's only part of the total cake of biochar that is being produced at all. So if we see transitions in this triangle, the carbon removal part could grow slower or faster in the future. Then towards the regions, Germany, again, the largest part, followed by per one single country, also Austria, Switzerland strong, Nordics as well. And over time, this also changed not that much the last 2 years. Again, Germany leading in terms of production capacity, Austria, Switzerland growing steadily, and Nordics has grown very fast, with Sweden, Denmark, and Finland being the most relevant countries. But we also see Spain, France, and UK picking up in volumes. Then there's movement on the carbon removal standards and methodology sides with isometric and reverse that entered quite substantially the space, and of course the CRCF that will soon be launched. Now, let me quickly give you, wait a second, I was here. Coming to the reference projects, as you have seen from previous reports, just to highlight what projects look like, selected here a few projects, one in Denmark with Aqua Green as equipment supplier, producing biochar from sewage sludge. Then a project with Pyrec as an equipment supplier that was commissioned in 2024 with agricultural crop residues. Then project with equipment supplier Syncraft in Gensandorf. The focus on this system is energy production and with biochar as being a byproduct. Then out of the category industrial, a system that is already a bit in production, but I still wanted to highlight this project with 20,000 tons of biochar production, serving to 3 markets: responsible charcoal, metallurgy, and carbon preserving applications, using forest residues and wildfire wood, and also here electricity generation. Then another trend we saw is that we see European equipment manufacturers going to abroad, installing systems in the US, in 2 examples here from equipment supplier Carboforce, which installed a system in Utah, or and then here a project in Illinois from equipment supplier NGE, which is here pluralizing agricultural residues. Yeah, and from the status now over to scaling. How can that be scaled to climate relevance? As many of you know, I've been in the solar business in my previous life, and so we are not looking into biochar here. This is PV, cumulative installed capacity in gigawatt. And this is really interesting to look at the growth rates. So growth rates here on the right axis, we had a phase where the growth rates were extremely high, and that was pushed by political support, feed-in tariffs in Germany, Spain, and other countries. But now what we're seeing is something very exciting, that now the growth rates are really picking up again. And that is because of the nature why what is needed, what are success criteria for fast growth. And if we look at the 4 criteria, it's modularity, being fast in project implementation, and competitiveness in niches, and ease of financing. There are very clear similarities between the PV market and the biochar market, because also biochar is modular from small to large plants. Preparation and construction can be relatively fast. There are niches where biochar has shown competitiveness, and that triggers volumes, lowers cost, and last but not least, financing with a technology that is at high TRL levels is possible. Now, coming to the scaling, biochar carbon removal has shown a strong track record of rapid growth, and it has all fundamentals to keep scaling fast. So when we look at the scaling track, what you see here is first the historic growth, now here in amount of CO2 captured with BCR, and now assumed a growth rate of 50%. And this growth rate, the future growth rate, exclusively depends on the political will to want to make this happen. It's not a question whether we can do it as a biochar industry. And if we compare, I mean, this is a scenario, this is modeling. This is not like a crystal ball I'm looking into. This is modeling. And if we model a growth rate of 50%, which is technically feasible, BCR could do around 30% of the indicative target of the European Commission for permanent carbon removal. Now, going from the projection to 2030 over to 2040, I've modeled two scenarios, one starting at 50% and then going down to 40% from 2030 beyond, and one with where I capped the 50% growth rate. And that would bring us, depending on the scenario, to over 40 million to over 80 million tons of CO2 by 2040. And now we are comparing this again to the 2040 target as of the impact assessment of the European Commission, which was 75 million tons of permanent carbon removal. And today, this target is only associated with BECCS and DACCS. And I don't think that this is a good idea, because it's time to include BCR into this equation, and not to replace the others, but to create a balanced portfolio of CDR solutions. And again, technically, today we have around 185 plants in operation. It is technically and for the industry, it is possible to scale this to 1,000 plants in 2030 and 10,000 plants in 2040. The resources are there, and the 10,000 plants would roughly deliver 40 million tons of CO2 on a relatively safe development pathway. But now the question is, what happens if there is no adequate political support to get into the compliance markets, and or if the voluntary carbon markets that are dominating today, if they don't favor European carbon credits? I mean, you have seen that there's a price difference between European biochar carbon credits and Global South biochar carbon credits. Now, if for this case, I modeled a downside scenario with delayed political support. So in this scenario, the assumption was that the growth rates are only gradually growing up again, because I'm still convinced that this is biochar carbon removal is the least cost option for permanent carbon removal. So it will find their place. For me, it's only a question as to when this happens. But in this scenario, you can see we'll only reach 15 million tons by 2040 under this growth scenario. So concluding on this presentation and webinar, yes, BCR is capable of delivering carbon removal at climate relevant volumes within 15 years, but the right political framework is needed. Otherwise, it will just not happen. And I'll close with this slide that I also see a huge synergy between biochar for carbon removal and biocarbon being used in the metallurgic industry, because clean energy is not enough, and CDR, the industry needs renewable carbon. So biochar will not only remove CO2 from the atmosphere, it will also enable volume production of renewable carbon for the industry, but it might take some time for the markets to really develop to large volumes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans-Jörg. Thanks a lot. It was a great presentation, and actually I tore quite a bit from this. So thanks for going into details. Just a few takeaways. What I found really good this time is that you opened up a little bit to different sectors: responsible charcoal, metallurgy, and biochar carbon removal, because it's basically the same product that could go into all three of them. And if we wanted to show, and that's discussions we had on numerous occasions, we want to show the market trends, then we of course need to also consider those. So that's the launch of this part of it. So traditional and novel sectors, super important now also to look into the latter. Then what you said, the inertinite benchmark integration, I think this is also a vital component. And we've seen this at the Biochar Summit, where Christian Holzleitner of DG Klima stressed on that point that the inertinite fraction of biochar is of this importance for the carbon removal certification. So this also, of course, leads to a buy-in, because you have a certifiable product where you know of its persistence. And then, of course, the Global South and projects that are EU-based regarding the verification, offering a quality assurance, and this cooperation of different regions of this world I also found very appealing. And then, of course, the CDR portfolio is something we've been talking about in the last days, in the last years, and this is also something you manifested very nicely. So thanks a lot. Yeah, what you said is the growth of biochar carbon removal in Europe fully depends on political will. And this is what David Chiaramonti, a friend of us and also member of our scientific council, he said years ago, it's either we set the framework to include BCR well into EU climate policy, or this material will go into metallurgy, for example, where it has a good use, of course. But the question is, how much do we want to put into biochar carbon removal? How needed is it also?